So do you remember when you were a little kid, maybe your great grandparents sitting down on the couch with you talking about the day all the horse-drawn carriages disappeared and everybody suddenly had to drive a car? Amazing story, wasn't it? Or maybe it was your grandparents, not your great-grandparents, your grandparents, maybe for some of us, our parents, sat us down, talked to us about the day radio just stopped working and we all had to buy TVs. Everything changed just like that. Or for those of us, we're a little bit younger, it was that day all the phones in our houses disappeared and we had to get cell phones. Nothing left, no landlines, no other phones at all. And it just happened overnight. Okay, I'm willing to bet that none of you heard any of those stories because those stories didn't happen. All of those events happened gradually over time. Now, some people even still have landlines, and we all know we still have radio all over the place. I'm willing to bet there are a few places that still have horse-drawn carriages. But the pandemic, that was different than anything we'd ever experienced. Oh my gosh, am I going to say it? Am I going to say the word unprecedented? Yes, there you go. I remember it was, I believe, second week in March here in Colorado. Now, the state of Colorado was a little bit more reactive than some of the other states in the US and some of the other countries around the world. But we had been keeping track of what was going on around the world. And at my Toastmasters meeting on a Thursday night, I gave a speech talking about the potential to go to virtual, to start using Zoom for our meetings, which seemed a bit reactive, a little bit early in the game. But my club went ahead and voted to start the very next week as a virtual club, which was fortunate because Friday, the very next day, the location we were meeting at called us up and said, "You can't meet here anymore." And then the state of Colorado shut down. Now, that same Friday, I chose, for reasons totally unrelated to the pandemic, to stay home and work from my office here. Now, I work as a salesperson for the Boulder Daily Camera, one of the last remaining newspapers of our day and age. And I thought, I'm just going to stay home. And I hadn't had the job very long, so I was taking a little bit of a risk. My boss called me and I said, yeah, I figured I could work from the office. Just, well, as long as you're working, that's fine. Turns out I had not gone back to the office since. The next Monday, we all got emails that said, don't come in. And a few months later, they canceled the lease on our offices, and we don't even have offices anymore. Our entire life is virtual. Overnight, everything changed. And for those of us who are speakers, those of us who are in Toastmasters, it was forced upon us in a way that not everybody took so well. I mean, I'm imagining, since you're here today, you were probably one of those people who was like, okay, no big deal. I'll just get on Zoom. We'll make it happen. But there were a lot of people who didn't want to be on Zoom, didn't want to learn how to use Zoom. You know those people? Are they even still in your clubs? Are they still working at the same places you're working at, or did they go find something else to do when they realized they could only do their job virtually? We were forced at that moment to become incredibly adaptable. we had to adapt faster than we had ever adapted before. Some of us had to go buy computers. Some of us needed to buy cameras, microphones, lighting. Others of us chose to buy none of those things, but we got on Zoom anyway, and we all know who those people are. They all have their camera off because they don't want to be seen in their dark rooms that are poorly lit with bad cameras. Of course, when I have my camera off and I'm in a meeting, it's probably because I'm eating Ben and Jerry's. Don't want everybody to see that. But we didn't all go do that immediately. You know, some of us were a bit ahead of the game, right? You know, I'd used Skype before. I'd use other video programs. Some of us, the very first time I ever did a video conference, it was in person, but we were video conferencing with an office of Toastmasters in another state. So it's not like we'd never done it before. This was just suddenly a requirement instead of something cool we got to do. So over time, maybe you decided I need a camera upgrade. I did. I was just using the camera on my laptop. And eventually, probably 10 months later, I went and I got an HD camera, which is kind of overkill because Zoom doesn't even show you HD. But at least I had the best potential picture. I'd already had a fairly decent microphone because I'd already done podcasting. But how many of you have gone out and bought different microphones? Or maybe if you're speaking beyond Toastmasters or for a contest, you got a lapel mic that works online. A lot of different things we could do that we gradually built up to as we found out that we needed to do it. Now, what I did at the beginning of the pandemic in terms of my speaking, since I wasn't one of those people that was all angry about it, in fact, I'm thinking, wow, I don't have to drive anywhere. So that's less travel time. I can just be at home. It's completely simple. I can look at my notes and nobody knows, if I do it right, at least. I thought, what if I spoke in every Toastmasters district around the world? At that moment, there were 120 Toastmasters districts. Now, I've been in Toastmasters now 23 years. So I know Toastmasters from all over the world. I've been to the international conferences. So I had a good network. But I didn't want to impose on other clubs. But let's face it, at that time, clubs were having trouble getting speakers. They were having trouble with attendance. Some clubs were ramping up and saying, hey, look at this. We can bring people in from all over the world. We can have guest speakers who we could never dream of having come not just to our district, but to our division or to our club. So I just went out and I used the internet. I went to the Toastmasters members group and I said, hey, I would love to speak at your club. If you have an opening, if you're having trouble getting speakers, I would love to come speak at your club. My goal is to speak in every district. And I immediately got a response that said, wow, Rich, that's pretty selfish. You want to take a speaker slot? You want to speak at every club? Why not just show up and be a timer? Well, I thought about it and I thought, okay, I can see that. I can see that point of view. Want to be service oriented. That's what Toastmasters is about. I don't think being a timer really qualifies in the challenge that I had, but I wanted to serve. So I changed it from speaker to speaker or evaluator. Surely there'd be openings for evaluator. And I ended up probably about 50-50 after all was said and done. Spoke at a bunch of clubs, occasionally spoke for district conferences or district TLIs, did evaluations of speakers I'd never seen before. I even went to a club in France that spoke French, no English. It was all French. And I was the table topics evaluator. So I'm evaluating table topics that I can't understand. It's totally me evaluating them on tone of voice, on gestures, on enthusiasm, maybe on a couple of things I might have heard that I might have understood. Talk about growth. That was something that made me stretch in ways I hadn't anticipated. By the time I got my 120 districts, we'd grown to 124. And so I spent another month getting to those 4 newly formed districts. But I did finally get to all of them. I don't know if we have more districts now or not, but if we do, maybe I should look it up and see if I can get there. The point is, I didn't sit back and whine about what I couldn't do. I saw Toastmasters all over whining about what they couldn't do anymore, how tough it is on Zoom, how they have bad connections. Okay, I get that, but you could still try. You could still make an effort. There are some legitimate excuses, but for the most part, if you attack a problem, you can find a solution. That's really what the talk is about today. It's about approaching all the changes that are happening in our speaking world with an attitude of problem solving, an attitude of optimism, of growing opportunity. You think about it. You no longer had to stay home from Toastmasters if there was a storm, if there was a foot of snow out there. You could just Zoom in. We had major fires here in Colorado a couple of months ago. And we had members who came to our Toastmasters meeting who said, well, we're in a zone that needs to be evacuated, maybe. But until they tell us, I'm here. It's like, that's dedication. That's dedication. There are no excuses in some ways anymore. I've had contestants come to our club from all over the world to practice so that they can get feedback they never could have gotten before. Round robin evaluation for people they've never met with cultural considerations that they may have never had before. My opportunity to go out and speak in India, in China, in all over Europe and Australia and New Zealand, Japan, speaking to groups I'd never spoken for before. Oh, I might have had a couple of people here and there at a conference, but never an entire district in India. That made me have to really do some homework and try to make sure that whatever I was going to use humor-wise was going to be appropriate. And if I still failed, I was going to have to be aware of it and back it up. You really get a chance to grow when you take yourself out of your environment and go out and use this technology that we have now to further yourself as a speaker. Now, I'm talking mainly about Toastmasters, but let's face it, in professional speaking, we had some of the same advantages. You no longer had to spend 5 days to go to a conference. You just got on Zoom and you spoke for your hour and a half session. You saved on travel, you saved on time, personal tear and wear, and maybe you didn't sell as much. Maybe you sold more. Maybe you got a chance to go places you wouldn't have been able to go to before. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of cancellations for conferences early on, but suddenly those conferences just started to happen anyway. People realized, hey, this isn't happening for just a couple of months. This is going to be the next year. the next 2 years. You look at Tony Robbins, he had an event, he had, I think, over 50,000 people signed up and attending his Zoom conference last summer. It was amazing. Of course, he had all the money, all the resources to make it amazing, but he hadn't done it before. He had to grow himself to make it happen. So we can certainly each grow ourselves and find a way to make it happen. So now the world's changing again, right? Now we're not forced to be on Zoom. Now we get to be on Zoom. And this conference isn't in person, but there are a lot of conferences that are in person, and they are hybrid as well. So they're in person and they're virtual. How do we take advantage of that? How do we deal with that? I mean, for me, I am less likely to go someplace in person than I've ever been. Part of that is because of my physical limitations that I had prior and that have gotten worse over the last 2 years. So it's much easier for me to sit here in my office and give a presentation than for me to, at least if I were to travel somewhere today, I'd have to get in a wheelchair, not just to go to the front of the line at Disneyland, as one of our presenters was talking about earlier, but just to get to my car, to get into the airport. Well, I'd much rather just hit Zoom. But what if you are going in person, but you have a Zoom audience? Then you've got to learn how to deal with cameras. Remember not to ignore the audience that's out in front of you, even if they're all ignoring you because they're all off camera. Of course, we all know that just because we're off camera, we're not necessarily ignoring the speaker, but it can be easy to feel that way when you are the speaker, especially if you're also in person. It can be your tendency to just focus on the people that are there in person and not show the correct respect to the people who also chose to Zoom in. So you need to make sure the room is set up correctly so that when you're looking at the audience in person, you don't suddenly have to turn to look at the Zoom audience. Because that doesn't work. Because that means when you're back to the people, the Zoom audience sees you like this, and you're completely disconnected. But just like when we were all in person, we have to control the room and make sure it's set up so that the audience is going to have the best experience of listening to you as a speaker. So what are some other growth opportunities that we have? Being recorded. You know, if I'm in person, but I'm also virtual, I get a recording of how I look in person. That's probably going to be pretty good. Whether it's just a Zoom recording or if it's a combination of the Zoom recording and the camera recording I'm getting in person, maybe I'm able to get more angles than I would get otherwise. I'm probably able to get better sound because they're having to make sure you have strong sound when you're hybrid. And I know I have better sound when I'm just on Zoom than when I'm in a regular room and they may not even give me a microphone, or they may give me a lousy microphone, or they may give me a great microphone, but the speakers don't work well. So we have a little bit more control, a little bit more opportunity for strong video that we can use to advertise ourselves if that's what we want to do, if we want to be professional speakers, if we want to go out and, you know, just speak at a Rotary Club or try to get our next TEDx or our first TEDx, or if we just want to evaluate ourselves. Getting that film is great. Watching it is a little bit more effective. So don't just get the film, make sure you watch it. The bottom line, and I'm going to end with a few minutes left because I want to take your questions, not just in whatever hallway we end up in, but here as well. And that is, that we don't know what the next step is going to be. Is COVID going to get worse again? Is there going to be something else? Are we going to go back to all in person and a little bit of Zoom, a little bit of Microsoft meetings or whatever platform you may use at any given moment? We don't know. But we can approach it with the experience that we have had over the last 2 years. We can find a way to have the optimism that we need to make sure we get the right equipment, that we help other people get what they need, whether it's equipment, whether it's just knowledge, so that they can attend the meeting and go to the right breakout room. It's that optimism that is going to send us forward so that we can go out and continue to speak one way or another. Or as my session is titled, so that we can speak anyway. So anybody have any questions? Take yourself off mute. We don't have too many people here that will talk over each other. Just ask me a question.
We've spoken about hybrid meetings and how that's working for some clubs. I've actually put into the chat, I'm a member of a number of clubs, and 2 clubs here in my district. One has decided to go hybrid full on, and that works really well for it. One decided that it didn't want to be hybrid. And what I wanted to ask is, that club decided against going hybrid, or against staying hybrid, because it felt that the combined online in room sucked the energy out of the room. Is that an experience that other people have felt? And if so, how did you get around it?
Well, I think people can feel that way. And I think sometimes they feel that way because just getting the technology to work can be a real problem. The 2 clubs that I'm in, we're both hybrid, and trying to get the tech to work, it's been a bit of a nightmare. But we're committed to doing that because both clubs that I'm in have international membership now. So we're kind of forced to be hybrid, and it's helped our clubs grow. But I can understand wanting to just be in person. And I don't think there's anything wrong with just being in person at all, just because, we've always had specialty clubs. We've always had clubs just be who they want to be. And if they want to just be in person, they can just be in person. And if people don't want to join the club or stay in the club because it's only in person, well, that's the same result that you would have if, say, your club suddenly started meeting in a church and people didn't want to meet in a church, and so they would leave your club. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't like the decision your club makes going forward. So you just got to go with what the club feels comfortable with, and then commit to making it work as well as possible. Does that answer your question, Graham? Andrew, you're not on mute. Does that mean you have a question?
No. Was I supposed to be on mute? I appreciate, Richard Peck, who passed president, also during the first year, traveled around the world in the same way, going to all the districts and many clubs.
Yeah, but they had to listen to him. They had a choice with me.
Right.
You don't say no to Richard Peck.
Yeah. So if you spoke at 122 clubs, does that mean you knocked out another 8 or 9 DTMs?
I knocked out a whole bunch of pathways, and I'm still a big project away from getting my second DTM.
Should organize this event, then you could have claimed that. No. You spoke about us using the experience that we've had in the last couple of years of having to, and yeah, we're going to use it. We had to pivot. It was unprecedented, all those sorts of cliches.
Right.
But you spoke about us being able to use what we have learned for the next big thing, whatever the next big thing is. How do you prepare for whatever the next change is going to be when you've got no idea what the change is?
Right. And what I mean by that is not necessarily, oh, well, you have all the equipment you need for the next big change. Well, what if the next big change is that all the electricity disappears? I don't know. Who knows what the next big change is? But the flexibility that we have built into our brains over the last 2 years, the adaptability that we have created in our lives, it's that type of an approach to life that is going to help us. Because we haven't all had to deal with a lot of that prior to the pandemic. I mean, there were small crises. Individual families had things they had to overcome. We've always had things to overcome, but never as a world, at least in my lifetime of 53 years, have we ever encountered something at this scale that was mutually shared, where we all had to change the way we approached our life so that we could have some semblance of a normalcy and keep what we had before, even if we were keeping it in a different form. So it's that flexibility and adaptability in our attitudes that I'm saying we can learn from and take forward.